When I was a child, maybe 6 or 7, my dad and I had moved from the bustling big city of Atlanta to the quiet desolation of Arizona. To this day, I'm still unsure of the reason behind the move, but I think it was to put as much space between my dead mother and us as possible. Life hadn't been very kind, but we had each other. The house had been set smack dab in the middle of 10 or so acres of nothing. Flat, arid, dusty nothing. I wouldn't describe the house as dilapidated, but it wasn't something that royalty would take a shining to. The floor was wood, covered with tile, covered with carpet, and the walls were plaster in a space of even more nothing, something this area seemed to specialize in. It wasn't a bad house, but it wasn't the best. Despite that fact, I sit in my new apartment sometimes, missing all of that nothing. The first couple of days in the house were pretty tough on me. The change was vast and rapid, and my mind would constantly seek out the sounds of a busy metropolis, only to discover faint whispers in the wind and what seemed like muffled footsteps dragging along the hall when my dad was supposed to be sleeping. It was likely all my imagination, but I had immense trouble falling asleep. I would sit in my room, walls still bare and void of personalization, boxes stacked all around me, and I would jump and feel my heart go into overdrive at every strange and unfamiliar noise. Then that house settled quite a bit. After a while, even the adrenaline of a strange night and in a strange place could do little to fight against the exhaustion that overtook me, and I would find myself dreaming of endless dark fields, the sky a pitch black that seemed to absorb every sound wave that should have been naturally generated. There was emptiness all around me, yet through some kind of spatial sense, I knew there was something behind me, stalking closer and closer. And lacking the courage to turn around, I would set off into the distance, on the brink of mild hysteria, tears welling in my eyes, blood pulsing through my veins, and sobs brimming through my lips. No matter how fast I ran, how much I silently begged and pleaded, it always caught up to me. I would feel countless hands grabbing my limbs, pulling me backwards and pinning me to the ground. Then I would feel lips press against mine and force my jaws apart. My breath would leave my lungs, and I could feel a part of me being drained, some part of me that I never knew existed. Fingers would violently caress my face, oily and bitter tongues would invade my mouth, and I would lose senses one by one before I would awake with a start, my screams echoing in the empty house. In my little mind, I could swear that through the darkness, the closet door had inched itself closed. My father's logical process was that of mine now. New place, new fears. A kiss on the forehead and a warm glass of milk later, and we were back to sleep. No nightmares visited me that night. The next night, however, and the 3 after that, were a very different story. My father was one of those new agey guys. He would rub quartz on my feet if I felt a cold coming on. I caught him late at night reading tarot cards to neighbors, analyzing the constellations through a telescope, and planting herbs according to their positions. Since I was a Cancer, he would pick up little silver trinkets for me here and there, claiming that it would be good luck for me. So when I complained of my chronic nightmares, always the same one I might add, his solution was to consult some kind of runic tablature for spiritual relief, as he called it. On a night much like the first we spent in the house, he tore up a neat square of the carpet in front of the closet door, the place that I vehemently accused of my sleepless torment, and drew some runic doodles with yellow chalk on the ivory white tile that lay beneath. Looking back, It was most likely a ridiculous attempt to keep a paranoid child's mind at bay, but my father had no qualms about playing along. The man sure did love that weird little me. Whether I felt better because my fears were addressed and given resolution, or that it was a true placebo effect at work on my mind that could still believe such wonders, the nightmares had ceased. We both went on with our lives, and eventually, even I had forgotten that they had existed. When I was 17, on my last day of high school, I stepped off my bus and made my way down the dirt road to my home, the pep in my step as some girl had given me her number as a way to keep in touch. Climbing up those steps, reaching for the door, I smelled a strange odor, like rot. Maybe rot isn't the right word, because it smelled like no physical rot ever could. It smelled a bit like ozone, with illness mixed in, like the smell that accompanies a sterile hospital floor. Walking into the house, I found my father slumped in his favorite lazy boy. He would have looked asleep, and his skin not looked so nearly translucent. Cardiac arrest is what the coroner announced a couple of hours later. Looking through the window of my bedroom at all the red and blue flashing lights of the response team, I felt like I had been robbed of the one thing I had left. I always wondered why he was robbed and not lost, but that was the word that sprang to my mind. There were questions about relatives, which I had none, and where I was to stay. As it turned out, my father had amassed a bit of debt, and I was forced to sell the house. Luckily, not all the money was needed, and I ended up having enough for a down payment on an apartment in Tucson. I'm not mad at my father for that. He always tried the best he could, and I loved him dearly. These things happen sometimes. Packing up my belongings, I noticed the square patch of carpet in front of the closet. Its color was a bit deeper than the surrounding carpet, almost like it had been cleaned recently. I pried it loose with a knife and felt a lump in my throat as I looked down upon one of the last remaining memories of my youth. A bit of it had been erased away, but it remained somewhat intact. I suddenly felt the complete perversion that life had thrust upon me by taking my father away. I sat and cried for a long time before I brushed my hand against the tile, completely erasing the symbol from existence. For some reason, I felt like it was mine, that the house couldn't have it, that it belonged to me in my memories, and it wasn't supposed to be that way. After some more tearful packing, I was out of the house that night. My new apartment didn't have strange noises or muffled footsteps on the carpet. It didn't have plain nothingness or carpet on top of tile on top of wood. It didn't have shitty plaster walls. It didn't have nightmares. But it also didn't have my father. I spent the next few months keeping to myself, staying up late to watch whatever was on the television with bottles in my hand. I would sometimes fall asleep in front of the TV and awake the next morning waiting for it all to just be a bad dream. One night there was a pounding on my door. It doesn't really matter what time of the day or night it happens, but when it does, you're always immediately awake. 2 flashes of police badges and some questions later, I was following them back to my old home in the middle of the nothingness. Some nice family had bought the house not too long after I had sold it. A mother, father, and a little boy. All of them found dead in their beds. Their hearts just stopped. Stepping up to that house again, I was reassured that the bodies had already been taken to a morgue, but I didn't fear seeing bodies again. No, this fear was largely primal, some deep nerve in me tensing, engaging in a fight-or-flight scenario, even with no immediate danger present. Right there is the footprint. In my old room, the boys' room from what I was told, I took my shoe off and placed it next to what indeed looked like a footprint. Its shape was singed into the carpet, way larger than mine, resting in front of the closet, which had its door seemingly busted off its hinges. I felt chills as I looked into the darkness of it. Right. Well, that's all we needed. I was given a pat on the shoulder and permission to dismiss myself. Walking down the hallway in a curious gait, I caught a smell that I recognized instantly. It was that smell of mental rot, of hospitals and death. Some deep part of me recognized it and named it, and I then collected myself hurriedly and broke into a trot to my car. I left that house as a fading image in my rearview mirror, and I haven't seen it since. I forget sometimes how it looked on the inside or just how much nothingness surrounded it. I sometimes forget what color the carpet was or the paint on my bedroom walls. I sometimes forget the material that made up the recliner that my father took his last breath in. But I never forget that smell. Thankfully, I've never smelled it since, but I cannot erase it from my mind. Watching the house shrink into the distance, some deep part of me had calmed itself, but the words that labeled that smell still stuck out in my mind. It was the smell of dead dreams.